What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Claudia Bellafato holding it down in the DraftKings studio in Boston. We got a great show for you guys. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Get ready for some lacrosse propaganda. Memorial Day weekend is here, which means y'all are going to feel me this weekend. But first, Claudia, why don't we tell everyone else what we have coming up today besides that?
Get ready to feel GoJo, people. I do like the swag, though. You look good, man. Scot-free. We got to talk about Scottie Scheffler and this whole arrest situation. We'll get into new police video that has been released. Shroff and Smetty, a little lacrosse, as we just talked about off the top. Monaco Grand Prix in hour one. And Football Friday, head coach Dan Campbell ranks among best NFL coaches. We'll talk about their odds heading into this season. And we're just going to pretend, guys, that we didn't all pick the Pacers last night. We're just going to pretend that didn't happen. Now, we did talk about taking the points. We didn't necessarily say straight up, but we did say that Game 2, Boston tend to drop, because they did, but they didn't last night. It was a pretty easy one, 16-point win, now up 2-0 on the series, 126-110 was the final. A 40-piece for Jaylen Brown. Tyrese Halliburton left the game with a left hammy late in the third, did not return. Miles Turner held scoreless in the first half, just 8 points and 4 rebounds overall. And in the end, 16 Pacers turnovers. Again, an issue, GoJo. Tyrese Halliburton, of course, huge news that we'll have to keep in mind. But the Celtics looked pretty calm, cool, and collected throughout that game.
They did. Dad, I want to start by certainly giving the Boston Celtics credit, especially on defense. I thought the way they came out and set a tone for a team that was statistically the second best defense in the league for the most of the year, came out, and I thought Miles Turner was the name Claudia mentioned that they managed to frustrate most. They took the core of that Indiana Pacers group and said, all right, hey, Pascal Siakam, you might get yours. And boy, did he have a night. But Miles Turner, who had been an important part of this run for the Indiana Pacers, was immediately frustrated. They put Jaylen Brown and some smaller bodies on him and completely gummed up what had been the top scoring offense in the NBA. But Dad, it's really hard to look past that Tyrese Halliburton injury in the third quarter, where after all the run that Boston had went on, Indiana had that down to a 2-point game, and then the Tyrese Halliburton hamstring injury that had popped up earlier this year reared its ugly head again, and Boston staring down the potential of facing yet another opponent without their star player going forward on this magical run.
You know, it's one of those things where people will say, non-Boston fans, oh, look at the easy run they had, and my answer is, oh, well, you play who's out on the court. That's the way it goes. So you take the advantage if it's going to be advantage. Because, listen, even with Halliburton, Boston's a better team, but the Pacers played him extremely well in Game 1, down 12-zip in Game 1, always fighting back and fought all the way back to make that one to go overtime. This time there was a bunch of lead changes in the first. They actually had a lead with a little over a minute to go in the first to the Pacers before that 20-0 run, of which Brown scored 10 of those points. And then the injury to Halliburton. Again, he hurt the hamstring. I think was it in January, where he missed
against
10
Boston.
Against Boston, missed 10 games, had to be helped off the court a little bit in that one. Not so much in this one. He walked off, but still, any kind of strain to the hamstring it's not like you're jumping back from that one. So we're going to obviously keep an eye on that one, even at full strength. As I said, I think we all know, Boston, we believe, is a better team. You're missing Tyrese Halliburton. I mean, it's over. I mean, I just don't see what the Pacers, it was already scratching and clawing against, the top seed here, of which they almost pulled out Game 1. And by the way, I did pick the Pacers straight up in Game 2. I said they'd get one in Boston. Man, by the end of that one, it looked like they couldn't wait to get back to Indiana and get the hell out of there and move along. I mean, it was clearly one of those games.
By the end of that one, in the middle of the second quarter, where they went about 7 minutes of game time without a made basket, I'm looking around in the court, and we've had criticisms of the Boston Celtics being a team that maybe so wound up by the stress of expectation doesn't ever really look like they're having fun playing basketball. The Indiana Pacers looked like they wanted to auto-sim to the end of that game in the second quarter. That was as lifeless an effort from this group, and Dad, maybe a group that's finally feeling, I mean, how much do you buy into the idea that the Indiana Pacers may be finally feeling the effects of that strenuous 7-game series before, their legs under them, the missed opportunity in Games 1, maybe all finally coming and catching up with them?
I don't know. I mean, it's a team that's used to running. It's not like they're playing out of their norm, and they have all their players now minus Halliburton. So I don't know how much I buy into that as much I bought into we thought the Knicks wearing down because of the short rotation and the injuries. Listen, this was a 6-point game at halftime. You know, it turned into, a 16-point win, but it was a 6-point game. That's what we saw the Pacers do in game one, even though it started differently. They kept kind of fighting back until they were able to take the lead, and they did get it to a 2-point game in the third quarter. So they were doing what they had done in game one. But listen, Brown was just out of his mind in this game with 40 points. And then Halliburton goes down, and, I mean, that's like taking the air out of your sails. You know who you got, every time I went on the football field, I knew where I stood, and I knew where the stars of that team stood, and you knew who you counted on, right? And we can always say, and that's the line you're going to hear. Every coach says it because that's what you have to say, and that's the way you have to play. They don't stop the game. They don't say, okay, it's over because your best player is out. It's next man up. You say it. You want to believe it as much as you can, but a lot of times it sure as hell ain't true. And you know what? It's not going to work if you don't have your top player. So you can try and talk yourself into it. But when you see that player go down and not come back, you got to be like, oh, man, okay, this now already has been a bit of an uphill struggle. But, Claudia, it's going to continue that way.
Well, it's funny because we talk about depth with both of these teams, but it's a different type of depth to where your best player goes out for the Pacers. Sure, you have 6 other guys who can score double figures, but you don't have a Jaylen Brown when Tatum only has 4 points in the first half to go off and drop a 40-piece. So I think that's just the difference. The Celtics are just, like you said, the better team. And now I'm looking at the game 2 odds. Now on the road, the Celtics would be. They're still a 7-point favorite. Of course, that line adjusting because they are on the road, but maybe I gave the Pacers too much credit thinking that they could take this to 7, and I didn't think they would win it, but I did think it would be a little bit tighter, and I think what Drew Carter said the other day on the show was right. If they were going to grab a game, it was probably that first game, and I fear for Pacers fans now, especially if Halliburton is out or injured, and as we know, once you're out with injury once, you're not really 100% for the rest of that series. That's worrisome for sure, GoJo.
Well, especially soft tissue injury, a hamstring injury that's already popped up for Tyrese Halliburton before, because now, Dad, that becomes as mental as it is physical for that guy walking out into the next game where you're not sure you can count on the things that you've been able to do. And to Claudia's point, this is a team. Listen, Pascal Siakam looked like the alpha last night. There's no doubt about that. The way that he went out there, the depth of his bag on offense, I heard JJ Redick utter those exact words, was incredible and on full display last night, even before that moment went out, but obviously didn't end up being enough at the end because I think the rest of that team was so stymied, careless with the basketball again in a way that didn't pay off for them. But I want to go back to the Jaylen Brown point here for a second. Jaylen Brown is now the 7th player in Boston history with multiple career 40-point playoff games. Only Michael Jordan and LeBron James have more 40-point games in the Eastern Conference Finals. I can remember 2-3 years ago watching in the fourth quarter of games in the Eastern Conference Finals, Jaylen Brown be the guy to take over in this series. So, Claudia, I want to start with you. What's the relationship here between Boston fans and the way that they view this pair in moments like this? Because it seems like, while Jason Tatum overall, like, I'm not going to lie to kick it, Jaylen Brown, we can talk about the All-NBA snub and the motivation of the factor and all that he doesn't really care about, but he's not the same player both in terms of physical gifts, overall game as Jason Tatum, but it seems like time and time again when you see someone to put their head down and kind of do the thing, Jaylen Brown, he might not be able to dribble left, but he seems to be willing to do everything else. So how do you view his standing with this pair of stars, Claudia?
To me, it feels like a mentality thing, and I know for all Celtics fans, they think of Tatum. Tatum should be in the MVP conversation. Tatum should be the leader of this team. Jaylen Brown is the highest paid player in the NBA, but it's just he's always been the second to him, which I think now we've seen enough. We have a big enough sample size in these critical situations. He got that shot to take it into overtime. He was the one that picked up the slack here in this second game. And it does seem like sometimes, too, on the bench and when you go to games and you see it on camera, he just seems to have a little more. And I don't think we give maybe we give too much flack to Tatum for not really taking advantage of being that leader on the team and being the best player, but I just don't think we talk about Brown enough. So it's like when he does show up in the postseason, that's when everybody starts talking, but he has great games in the regular season as well. So I think it's an embarrassment of riches, and we could go back and forth talking about one or the other, but it's probably a mentality thing in my mind. It's like Brown knows that he is not Tatum. He is not in his shadow, but he is the 1B to the 1A. So I think this is great for him. He's already getting the money. So this really comes down to a situation to the Celtics where it's like, are we really going to have these two for much longer? Because I think everybody else in the league is looking at this saying, yeah, we want that guy.
That's the key there. How long can they sustain it? Having those two together. Because I agree. Everybody's looking at Tatum as he's got to be the guy. When's he going to emerge as that MVP, candidate, or I should say MVP winner? Is he ever going to get that? Is he going to be what we all think that he should be? And then Jaylen Brown just keeps going along, obviously, as you mentioned, getting compensated well. But I think the real question is how long can you keep this group together? We talk about a window of opportunity and keeping it together, both from team side to player side, of keeping the gang all here. So you kind of run. It was kind of like the Buffalo Bills. You get close, but you don't get there. And they made some massive changes this year, and we're going to see if any of that pays off. So how long is Boston able to hang on to kind of this roster? Obviously, you make tweaks every year, but with the main players.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we've gone from, for a while, wanting to break up the core of that Boston Celtics roster. I remember for years, the hot button sports talk radio topic was always, hey, it's time to break up Brown and Tatum. It's time to bust up this Boston Celtics core. They've shown with these group of guys in their early and mid-20s that they can't possibly get this done. And Lord knows I was one of the dumbasses that fell victim to that every now and then. But now facing the prospect of that on the other side, where it's, hey, this has been so good, but now these guys are going to get so expensive. Everyone else is going to want to come in and bust it. It's a fascinating mental dynamic because we're so used to and so wired in sports to believe the best player on the team automatically needs to be the person who's got the leadership voice, the person who's got those alpha tendencies, when sometimes you just get a guy like Jason Tatum who's got all those gifts and maybe behind the scenes is an exemplary leader. So much of leadership on a team is the stuff that we see. It's the tip of the iceberg, and so much is behind closed doors. But what we certainly get publicly is not a guy who seems dripping with the need to go out there and be the one to put it all on his back when things get tough for this team. So Boston, I think, again, and I think now the conversation, especially if Halliburton's compromised for the rest of the series, or God forbid, can't go for some stretch of games, you're already going to get the preemptive criticism of Boston having one of the easiest roads to a championship in a while. And Ted, this is not new, right? We heard this for the Los Angeles Lakers winning their championship and only championship of the LeBron era during the bubble season, where there's a massive gap in play, albeit for a global pandemic and things that also made life infinitely harder. But even the next year for Giannis Antetokounmpo and the Milwaukee Bucks, you could argue, and I think I would, that there was a bigger effect on that season because of the quick turnaround and also the path that they took to the finals that year. And so ultimately, I don't think, Dad, and I don't know what you feel about this, I don't think that's going to have any effect on a Boston Celtics fan enjoyment of this. I don't think it has any effect on the way that we would discuss its star players that would benefit legacy-wise from this, like Jason Tatum, who would add a championship to their hardware case. It would absolutely be a discussion contextually that I don't think is wrong, looking and saying every team you went up against. Like, hell, if I'm the Western Conference team, I'm nervous as hell about potentially feeding my star player to this Boston Celtics voodoo doll. But at the end of the day, the hardware is going to age pretty well no matter how you got there.
I don't care what the makeup is or how you win it. You win a championship, who gives a damn? You won a championship. There'll be a parade. They'll enjoy the parade. And you know what? Down the road, when you're looking back, maybe you say, oh, they won this title, and you mention a couple things. But for the most part, man, who cares? You won the title. That's the way it goes. Injuries happen. Circumstances happen. It's a long season, a lot of ebbs and flows, a lot of highs and lows. If you walk out of there as the last team standing, man, there will never be a but as far as I'm concerned. It will be, we are the champions. I'm going to wear my ring. I'm going to get drunk at the parade, and I'm going to take advantage of every opportunity I get at being called a champion. That's what's going to happen.
Absolutely. Millions of beers, they deserve it regardless, because it was another great season. But you just have to think, if it were to be the Timberwolves, when they got through with sweeping the Suns and getting through Denver, then getting through the Celtics, that would be, it's just funny how different the stories in the past have been. So, of course, any Celtics fan on here is going to be like, why would you say that? That's so wrong. And I'm not taking anything away from the Celtics, but to go up against every team in your path not having their best player, and I get it, they don't have Porzingis. It's not really the same. It's just not the same as not having Jimmy Butler or Donovan Mitchell. So that's all I go back to. As you were just talking about that, the path that the Timberwolves have had, if that's who they end up facing, if they take down the Celtics, man, that's going to be an amazing season for them.
Yeah, no, the Western Conference looking like a much mightier task overall than what we've seen out of the East. Claudia, you mentioned, though, Donovan Mitchell and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Interesting news out of there. JB Bickerstaff getting the heave-ho yesterday, Dad. The Cleveland Cavaliers part ways with him and Kobe Altman, their president of basketball operation, and Mike Gansey, their GM, are going to start to hit the list. But it seems like, listening to Brian Windhorst on with the folks at ESPN Cleveland the other day, that a lot of this is tied to trying to retain Donovan Mitchell this offseason. Remember, as soon as we finished up that series, the articles were up that night talking about the teams that might be trying to come after Donovan Mitchell in a Cleveland uniform. And it leads you to believe that there may have been something about a disagreement from Donovan Mitchell's end between JB Bickerstaff's coaching style, what went on. Because, Dad, on the surface, the guy showed steady improvement with this team, got them to an Eastern Conference semifinal without their best player then in that series amongst a litany of other guys that weren't on the roster, Jared Allen and company there. So on paper, it looks like a coach that made a lot out of his situation, but now was shown the door because this organization wants to keep the star player, and that's what matters most.
That's exactly what matters most. That's the only thing that matters is the players on the roster. The coaches, listen, players to a point are expendable, but coaches are way more expendable. We know the power of the players, and we'll see the direction they go. They're talking about the possibility of Kenny Atkinson being a former Nets coach, current Golden State Warriors coach. He actually coached Jared Allen and Karis LeVert when he was with the Nets. So will that be an association there possibly? So we'll see. I mean, but you're right. I mean, the head coach's head is always on the chopping block. If you have players that you want to retain, or a team that you want to retain, or a team that you think can go further and isn't getting there, the coach is always on the chopping block. And then obviously all the obligatory thank yous come out for what a great job you did for us. We just don't want you anymore.
That was a wild post. They made his bald head the O in there. It's bad enough that Claudia apparently put bald men on notice yesterday, calling us stalkers when she was talking about toupees. But now they got to use his bald. And look at, you know what the worst part about being someone in the public light like that is, a coach or like a legitimate famous person, is there's a Getty Images photo for every possible headline and situation about you. And they found the perfectly miserable looking JB Bickerstaff photo to use in the thank you tweet. Like, throw him a picture where he's smiling. I get he's probably not happy, but you couldn't find a better picture than slightly pouty sideline JB Bickerstaff, Claudia. I'd be pissed.
Oh, he's pouting. That's a full pout. I totally agree. That's wrong, man. They wronged him. Yeah. It is so interesting to see this almost like coaching carousel that we talk about. And it is unfortunate when you do have a team with talented players, if they don't make it to a certain level, you're the one that gets chopped. And now there's discussion, will he go to the Lakers? It's like, well, I don't know. Is that really going to make a difference, though? Is that really much different than what you had before? I find the coaching changes to be so interesting, Senior. But yeah, the Cavs really did him wrong there.
You mentioned the Lakers. The connection there is JB's dad, Bernie Bickerstaff, was in the front office for the Cavs when they won the championship when LeBron was on the team. So there's that relationship of Bernie and LeBron. So would that do anything? We're still waiting to see what happens with the Lakers, if it's going to be JJ Redick or somebody else involved in this, as coaches continue to play musical chairs to keep players happy.
Yes, I can say the NBA equivalent of moving your food around on your plate to make it look like you ate something, when in actuality, it's all just changed up locations. So plenty to get to there, but if Halliburton can't go, man, it seems like Boston's going to get to coast to another series win and make their way to that NBA Finals that's eluded them. Coming up next, though, a change of tune around Scottie Scheffler and the impending legal situation coming off his trip to Valhalla. Next, you're on GoJo Golic.
GoJo and Golic, a new video has been released of Scottie Scheffler's arrest outside of Valhalla. And we're getting some new information about the officer who arrested him and some background into his numbers and citations that were taken during that 4-hour period. You can't really see it because it's grainy, and if you're not watching, I'll explain it to you, but basically it's showing the cop chase after his car. And we sort of heard this, guys, when we got the original news. He, lunges onto the car, opens up the window, and then takes Scottie Scheffler away. We saw a lot of different versions of this video and this situation, but apparently now we're learning that the officer didn't have his body cam footage on, and so everything that they're taking from the situation, they're taking from an outside view, which makes this even more sticky. But GoJo, I have to give you credit because you did call this. You said, are we really on the police side of things after not knowing a ton about this situation?
It's just one of those things where we wanted to wait for everything to come out because we had only gotten one side of this story from someone who now seems a little bit less credible overall as the witness in this and the officer involved. And Claudia, to your point, Dad, all the footage that we got was either dash cam footage or pole cam footage. It wasn't there. Officer Gillis didn't have his body cam on and been disciplined by the Louisville Police Department for that because that's protocol, and in the situation he's in, he was supposed to have that on and didn't, which is already kind of where the red flag went up, I think, for a lot of people. But now seeing this footage, Dad, where, again, the description initially was he had attached himself to Scottie Scheffler's vehicle and been dragged there, talked about injury sustained, an $80 pair of pants, all ruined. And while there is still part of the video that we did not see, and there is still an outside chance that maybe this happened when the pole camera was blocked by one of the cars there, but the stuff that we have seen and the information we do know, Dad, seems to point more and more to the fact that this seems like an officer that may have embellished a lot of this situation now because he was frustrated with what was going on and that Scottie Scheffler wasn't listening to his exact words and commands in that moment because of a discrepancy and a misunderstanding where ultimately it seems like Scottie Scheffler and his crew are going to be on the right side of history here.
So let's just get all the facts out there. The charges have not been dropped. All the charges are still on, and he still has an appearance in court 9 a.m. on June 3rd. And his lawyer, Scottie Scheffler's lawyer, has said there will be no settlement. We did nothing wrong. Scottie did nothing wrong. Nothing will be settled. And you're right. We don't know what all the footage shows, but in this day and age, as the chief of police was saying, basically, and the mayor as well, how do you not turn on your body cam? In this day and age about what's been happening with the police officers and how much has been thrown at them, and it's been, listen, we know it's been ugly back and forth from public to police and vice versa. So to not have that on now and knowing for full transparency to show people what they're doing, because at the end of the day, we know they have obviously a very, very difficult job. And at the end of the day, we know there are some bad cops out there, but we don't paint the broad brush and say they all are. So but what this does is it clouds everything, right? Now it clouds everything. Now, there were other people around when that went on, so it will be interesting what those stories are. And I don't know if we're going to ever see any more video other than what we saw in this thing. At the end of the day, I agree with you guys, and I don't think anything is happening to Scottie Scheffler here. I think at some point the police department is to say this just isn't worth pursuing unless we have some rock solid evidence and other witnesses there that can corroborate what was done because the cop didn't turn on his body cam.
Well, it's not just the body cam, too. They gave us details into the background of this arresting officer, Brian Gillis. He was also suspended 5 days for doing donuts in his police car while on duty with an intoxicated civilian in Code 3 fashion. He also, I mentioned the 4-hour period. It wasn't during that, but in another 4-hour period, he issued 108 citations. So just some things going on with this officer they probably have to dig into, but you mentioned that arraignment is scheduled for 9 a.m. June 3rd, and I feel like everyone's really going to be watching this closely now that we have some details on the arresting officer, Senior.
So Claudia, two things. First, the amount of citations given out in a 4-hour period, civilians call that the end of the month. When they need to fulfill their citations and they start pulling people over a little quicker than maybe they normally would, to get your quota in. At least that's, I've been on the other end of that at times. And also, please tell me please tell me he's on duty, civilian drunk in the cop car doing donuts. This is a scene out of Superbad. Please tell me,
I was just going to say, it
seems
seems like the dude just watched Superbad.
Yeah. Yeah, please tell me you've seen Superbad.
I haven't, but like
Oh my God! Oh no!
I'm like,
no,
yeah,
Claudia.
Totally that scene.
I was going to say, you were about to smile and nod through that so hard.
Come on! No, I had to ask.
But I get the like the mood, the vibe of the movie. So yeah.
This is it. This is Bill Hader and Seth Rogen as cops with McLovin in the back seat, all smoking dope and drinking and shooting their gun and doing donuts.
Yeah,
I mean, this is Superbad. This dude pulled a real life Superbad.
And Claudia pulled a real life Steve Carell from 40-Year-Old Virgin talking about bags of sand here like she had any idea what was going on. And that's probably a reference that Claudia doesn't get. You haven't seen the 40-Year-Old Virgin either, have you?
I know I have seen it, but that's been a while.
Oh, all right.
I have seen it. I love Steve Carell, yeah.
Oh my God, 2007 was a long time ago. And yes, Dad, that was the first thing I thought was this guy has just watched too many movies if he's going out and literally trying to recreate what seems word for word, bar for bar, a scene from Superbad here. And so, and Dad, I think the part you mentioned about Scottie Scheffler's legal team being like, no, we're seeing this through is usually the telltale sign. Because if a rich person's done something wrong and given an opportunity to settle quietly, they usually take it. We usually see that as the case, especially in a situation like this where it's not some staggering indictment of his reputation. It was an ugly incident when he moved past quickly enough to be in contention on Sunday at a major championship. But now here, him basically saying, no, and has been steadfast throughout this, Dad. He wasn't able to say much, but I do think the fact that on one side you've had Scottie Scheffler, who even the day of this stood in front of microphones after he got off his round and answered every question, even saying, hey, I can't tell you everything, but he told us an awful lot and was very candid about that situation. While on the other side, we've had this constantly shifting story, this idea of information being withheld potentially, and now all this that we're learning on the back end. One side has been like this in Scottie Scheffler, and the other side in the Louisville police department story has been this never-ending roller coaster of different things that have come out. And so, again, while we still account for the fact that there's a gap in the timeline for us, all the evidence we have right now screams this guy got in over his skis and went way too far.
And again, for those that may not know, the actual charges are second-degree assault of a police officer, third-degree criminal mischief, reckless driving and disregarding traffic signals from an officer directing traffic. And basically from Scottie Scheffler, it's a big misunderstanding, which it seems is he was told down the road, when he was further back, that his car was able to be let through media and golfers. And then when he was just going, this particular cop tried to stop him, and Scottie may have miscommunication, kept going for a little bit. He certainly didn't give the cop a ride, at least from the video that we saw, so that it was a misunderstanding. And if that, in fact, is it, there's no way you see this thing going any further, right? It would be stunning if the police department were to keep going with this. Now, it will be it's already embarrassing to them, quite honestly, because you have one of your own that doesn't turn on the body cam, something you have to do. And then if you end up dropping you have 3-4 charges against a guy, and you end up dropping them all, you're basically admitting we continued to screw this thing up and got it wrong. And I don't know if they'll go that far with it or if they'll try and see if some of this sticks. But at the end of the day, I don't see any of it sticking.
No, and like we can sort of laugh about this one now because Scottie got out in real time and we have the mugshot picture that went viral that next day. But it's a good reminder that this is a scary proposition for a lot of people, and that this, relative to some of the other impropriety from the Louisville Police Department over the years, is a relative drop in the bucket and a scary proposition that, hey, this guy, in some instances, if Scottie Scheffler's not as famous as he is, that police officer story is taken as gospel and someone's life is affected in an incredibly negative way. So this is always, again, a little bit of a larger conversation around law enforcement that we're not going to have right now, but at least here, glad to see that Scottie, wow, GoJo and Golic putting Claudia on blast on Twitter.
Oh my God.
Claudia, which, you know what, I don't think is the worst indictment ever, but coming up next, we'll check in with ESPN play-by-play Anish Shroff and see what he thinks about it.
That's wrong, man. and Golic with some lacrosse propaganda, as GoJo likes to say. This weekend semifinals, Notre Dame, the 1 seed, 4.5-point favorites against Denver. You have Maryland catching 2.5 against Virginia. And I do love lacrosse, but we're bringing in an expert here to nerd out with you, GoJo.
Yes, Anish Shroff, ESPN and Carolina Panthers play-by-play announcer, kind enough to join us here, the voice of Champ Weekend, getting ready to take in all the action in Philadelphia. Anish, morning, brother. How you doing, man?
Good, man. Wipe that smile off your face. Wipe that smile off your face, man. I could see it. Like, look at you, like the Notre Dame arrogance just coming through right now.
You know what, Anish, I want to ask you, because this is my pitch every year, every time we get to Memorial Day weekend, for people to come and take in the sport of lacrosse that's seen so much growth between the college game, PLL, and the overall upward trajectory of this sport for a while. But Champ Weekend's a great entry point if you're someone looking to get into the sport. And I always go to my lacrosse opinions to Anish, who is someone that lives and breathes this sport as much as anybody around here. Anish, tell me I'm wrong for walking into Champ Weekend this year with the kind of confidence that I have in this year's Notre Dame team, the defending national champions who are waltzing into the Final Four as prohibitive favorites to take this thing home.
You know what, Mike? I've got receipts on here, and if I looked at our text threads about Notre Dame lacrosse over the previous 5 seasons, man, you were frightened and terrified to dip your toe into the pool of expectations, and now you're swimming in the deep end. But the reality is this team is a juggernaut in the, 4 or 5 years of the shot clock era. Outside of Maryland in 2022, it's the most dominant team that we've seen. In many ways, they're better than they were last year. They're more, I think, seasoned, accustomed to the stage, the career that Pat Cavanaugh has put together. You throw out words like legendary and iconic, frankly. This is a team now, I almost equate it to Clemson football a little bit, where for years you were that program who could never win the big game. And then once it turned, you became a big game program, a big game hunter that plays in big games and, more importantly, wins big games.
For those that may not know, when Mike was at ESPN, he was actually, for some lacrosse games on ESPN, the third man in the booth. He was like the everyman guy up there talking lacrosse and did the fanalist and did a great job. But I'd imagine it went from him being in the booth. Anish, I would imagine the production crew has Mike's face with an X through it, that if he's down on the sideline, don't interview him, because he has made it known he is going to be so drunk at these games that you don't want to put a microphone anywhere near him.
Yeah, and I need to let our production crew know, because he has let me know multiple times that he will be at the game and he will not be in a state of mind to talk.
Yes, no, I cannot stress that enough. I am not going to be my best self if I'm anywhere near Champ Weekend. Yes, exactly. We'd like to keep that around here. But Anish, I guess in the non-Notre Dame division this weekend, because as you mentioned, they are long favorites going into this weekend. They're coming off a season where they had one loss that they avenged with their quarterfinal win against Georgetown there. But looking at the rest of the field with Denver, Maryland, and Virginia all rounding out this Final Four, who in this field would have the best chance of knocking off this Notre Dame team, who is the prohibitive favorite?
You know, what's funny is on paper, I think everybody else is a severe underdog. Could Denver do it? Yeah, they play the type of defense that, makes you eat soup with a fork. They did it to Syracuse last week. They've done it to, most of their opponents this season. They have the ability to play the same kind of game that Georgetown played against Notre Dame early in the season, when Georgetown beat Notre Dame, as you said, the only team to beat Notre Dame, which is shrink the game. Think of it this way, like the football analogy would be, if you've got this high-powered spread offense that likes to run 90 plays and go up and down the field, can Iowa slow them down? Playing grinded out football, bleed the clock football, field position, fewer possessions, or in basketball, a team that's going to, again, play late into the shot clock, hit a couple of dagger threes with, single digits, 5 on the shot clock, and then, you get a couple of bounces. Denver's capable of playing that game. For Maryland and Virginia, the big challenge is going to be Monday, and you have 1 day rest. Oftentimes that game comes down to the deeper team, and Notre Dame's depth is such an asset. When I saw them in person in Charlotte in the ACC tournament, they're third midfield, which is essentially, it's their third line midfielders. Most teams don't even run a third line. They were running the third line, and that third line was scoring on Virginia and Duke's number one defense. It's, again, from a depth standpoint, they have the pieces, they have the horses. I think if they win Saturday, they become even tougher to beat on Monday.
Well, Notre Dame holds a 14-11 advantage over Denver all time. They've met 3 times in the tournament like they are going to Saturday, and Denver has won all 3 of those. So makes it a little nervy if you're a Notre Dame fan. How about, there have been certainly for a number of programs, brothers who have dominated programs. Where would the Kavanaugh crew kind of fit in amongst other schools as well on what they've meant to their lacrosse programs?
Yeah, Mike, I don't even know if I would go that route and compare them to, let's say, the Gate brothers at Syracuse or the Powells at Syracuse. To me, what they have done at Notre Dame, they're the first family. They're the equivalent of the Gates and the Powells, maybe not as players, but in South Bend and for Notre Dame lacrosse. If Notre Dame walks away from this weekend, they win a championship, and that's 2 in a row. I kind of look at Pat Kavanaugh as a guy who, listen, if you're going to build a statue of any player in the history of Notre Dame lacrosse, he's the guy. And his career has been compared to his ACC brethren, Brendan O'Neill at Duke, Connor Schellenberger at Virginia, 2 other great players. I kind of look at Pat as like the Derek Jeter of the group, where when he goes back, the cheers are the loudest. He's going to be beloved. He struck a chord that goes beyond statistics, that goes beyond on-field performance. It's the way he plays, the way he resonates with the fan base. His brother Chris, his brother Matt, I think we're talking one day in the very near future, once Chris is done playing at Notre Dame, you're probably talking that those 3 might be the 3 best players in the history of Notre Dame lacrosse. They're the first family of Notre Dame lacrosse. And again, you're talking about 3 brothers who are probably going to transform Notre Dame lacrosse into a blue blood.
It's certainly been a massive next step forward for the program in the last couple seasons for all the reasons that you mentioned. And you mentioned a couple of the big names. Pat Kavanaugh for Notre Dame, obviously a finalist for the Tewaaraton, the college lacrosse equivalent of the Heisman Trophy. Connor Schellenberger at Virginia. Anish, as we close this out with about a minute left here, who are a couple of the other big names for people to keep an eye on if they are tuning in for the first time this weekend and looking to see what the best of the sport is?
Yeah, so, Schellenberger was the number 2 pick in the PLL draft. He had the game-winning goal in the quarterfinals. He's arguably the greatest player to ever put on a Virginia uniform, and that is a storied program that's won 7 national championships and has had just a long list of stars. You mentioned Pat Kavanaugh. A couple other names that stand out. Maryland has a defenseman, Ajax Zapatello. He'll be guarding Schellenberger most likely on Saturday. They had a great matchup a few years ago in the quarters, and Zapatello actually shut him out. Zapatello just won the Enners Award yesterday. He is the first defensive player in more than 20 years to win that award, and the first defenseman to win that award since 1993. So you're talking high level defense. And then, for Denver, their defensive unit as a whole, I think you'll really like watching guys like AJ Mercurio, who can push transition. Casey Wilson is a short stick D midi who played on Team Canada last summer in San Diego. And then they've got a really good faceoff guy in Alex Stathakis. But the stars are out, man. Virginia's got them. Notre Dame certainly has them. The Irish are overwhelming favorites, Mike, and man, again, I don't know, I don't know who you are anymore. Like, you are confident about Notre Dame lacrosse. I have never seen this version. I've never seen this version of GoJo Jr. No, I haven't.
We will see how long this version of me sticks around, but I'm going to ride the wave as long as I can. Everyone, check out and listen to Anish on the call this weekend at Champ Weekend. It's going to be an absolute blast, one of the best ambassadors the sport has. Anish, enjoy practice and enjoy your time before I stride into Philadelphia confidently.
Yeah, hopefully you recognize me.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. The F1 Monaco Grand Prix is this weekend, and of course, we're going to talk cars, but we also have to talk yachts, because this is basically a rich people party. This is going to be the biggest yacht there, owned by the Ritz-Carlton. 149 cabins, guys, a pool, several pools, spa, gym. Rooms cost $10,000 up to $100,000. I'm assuming that's a night because this thing looks ridiculous. So yeah, lots of yachts, lots of nice sights. I'm sure some cool clothes and lots of jewelry, lots of bling. But to talk less about the cars and all of that, and to talk more about the cars, less about the boats, we welcome in our next guest.
Yeah,
Wow.
Jessica Smetana, kind enough to join us here from the Dan Levitard Show, but also with Spencer Hall, the co-host of DNF, that you can check out as part of Levitard and Friends as well. And I do think one of the more audacious things that we don't talk about enough is the fact that cruise ships have the gall to bring out a small ocean inside the larger ocean on their deck and just wave it in its face.
That is true. It's a little bit outrageous, but I think that it's right to talk about yachts and the display of wealth at Monaco instead of the cars, because that's kind of what this event is about. Unfortunately, the race on Sunday is a lot of racing fans' least favorite race on the calendar because these cars are so big and so heavy and very difficult to overtake one another on the narrow streets of Monaco. So it has really become an event where everything that surrounds it kind of gets the top billing, and then Sunday's race is a little bit secondary, unfortunately.
By the way, 149 cabins. That's not a yacht. That's a cruise ship. But my God, it's a yacht. That's just is Monaco outside of Miami, Austin, and Las Vegas. The stops in the United States. If you could go to one outside the United States, one race, Jess, would it be this one or would it be a different one?
This is definitely on like the top 5 list for sure. I would love to go someday. I've heard that it's not like super easy to get to. You got to fly into Nice in France and then drive into Monaco. But yeah, obviously, if I ever had the opportunity to go, I would certainly take it. The biggest difference, of course, between this race and the Miami race is that the Miami race's marina is actually fake water, but also real yachts. So.
There we go. Real water, real yachts. And like you said, a race that does feel sort of secondary to this. Jess, I think the last time we talked to you was at or around when Lando Norris won in Miami. And obviously that was a big moment because anytime a non-Max Verstappen wins in F1 these days, it seems noteworthy. Is there any change in the seed order here? Are we back to business as usual for Max now?
Well, so I mentioned that Sunday's race would be probably pretty boring, but I do think qualifying on Saturday will be really interesting because it's going to be what sets up Sunday. So the McLaren car that Lando Norris drives it's gotten a lot faster, and he had a chance to win even last weekend at Imola over the Red Bull. If there were a couple more laps in that race, it's very possible that Max would have lost that race to Lando. So I do think Saturday will be really interesting. The Ferraris, of course, are always fast. They don't have the same race pace as the Red Bull and the McLaren do yet, but there are also cars to look out for. This is Charles Leclerc's home race. He's Monegasque. So, and a lot of the drivers actually live in Monaco for reasons. So I think Saturday will be interesting. It's certainly keep an eye on the McLarens, keep an eye on the Ferraris. I mean, even the Mercedes could surprise us this weekend. But I think qualifying should be interesting. And no, I think that Lando Norris's win in Miami wasn't like a one-off thing that will never happen again. I think the McLaren has actually made some like really necessary improvements to put it in contention with the Red Bull.
Yeah, Lando Norris with the win and the almost win. Leclerc's only 48 points behind Max in the championship. Now I think this is only the 8th race, but still, we're used to seeing. I think Max is going for his 9th straight pole. I mean, it's ridiculous what he does, but maybe it'll be closer this year. People are talking about a different format. Lewis Hamilton has a different format at Monaco. Is that ever going to happen? Do you know what that format is, and is it something that could happen?
Yeah, I read Lewis's comments. He was talking about maybe different tires so that would increase the amount of pit stops during a race, which of course adds more variables. So it's not as straightforward as a race where the leader will always be in the lead, et cetera. But I don't know. I think that nothing would really surprise me, but Formula One, if they left Monaco, I would be surprised. But if they did something one-off special for Monaco, I would also be surprised. It seems more likely that it'll kind of be business as usual. But that being said, they have added the sprint format to a lot of races where they've tried to increase attendance and increase excitement on Saturday. So maybe they would do something like that. But I don't know if they would do a specific sort of tire requirement or adjustment just for one race. But I guess, anything could happen in the name of ratings and more money and more eyeballs on the television product.
Yep. All eyes will certainly be on that. Like we said, for the wealth porn as much as anything else that goes on around Monaco this weekend that we're looking forward to. Jess, while we had you, I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit, pun fully intended, and talk a little bit about all the noise that we've seen around the WNBA lately. You're someone that's consumed this a lot more than most before this season, where Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese and this explosion of the rookie class has drawn a lot of eyeballs here. What have you made of some of the comments from folks like LeBron James, Charles Barkley, and these people that have rushed out here to have loud opinions about the perception of Caitlin Clark around the league and how grateful people should be?
Yeah, I actually thought Shanae Agumike's response to Charles Barkley's comments on TNT was perfect. She talked about how charter flights were something that were happening before this season. It wasn't just because of Caitlin Clark. Of course, Caitlin Clark she's the reason for a lot of the increased attention and the ratings and everything. But I encourage people to read what Shanae wrote about it because she has a good perspective, having been a player, and also her sister is a current player and she talks to a lot of players. And I think that Charles Barkley's comments it seemed like he was reading like online fan criticism and equating that to what players actually think. And I just haven't gotten the sense that any current player has said anything that would be like remotely controversial about Caitlin Clark. And also, if they had, I think that is a really natural thing in sports to be a competitor and to want to beat another person on a team that's not your team. You don't have to like root for every other player in a league where you want to win the championship, right? And like winning the championship brings a lot more opportunities and more money and more exposure and all these things. So like this is people's careers. It was just really weird to see that, like all of that get kind of taken out of context. Are there fans that hate on Caitlin Clark? Yeah, yeah, there definitely are. I see a lot of it, but I think that there's like two separate conversations happening, and it kind of got jumbled into one. And I don't really agree with the idea that there's any WNBA players that feel like ungrateful or that there's like this. It was just really messy and I don't think rooted in a lot of truth.
Hey, pro players are doing the same thing they've done for years over high price rookies that come in. They want to not beat them down. I mean, that's in any sport anywhere. I mean, so I from the play standpoint anyway. Real quick, about a minute to go, where they say water always finds its level. How much higher, though, is the level going to be for the WNBA, not only because of Caitlin Clark, but because of that class that has come in and the added exposure they've gotten?
Yeah, I think that the level of play around the entire league is really, really high. Last night, the Sky beat the Liberty in New York. The Liberty are one of the best teams, if not the best team in the WNBA. And the Sky are a team with a lot of new pieces, a lot of Notre Dame players, I should add. Marina Mabry led the Sky last night in points. She had 21 points. Bree Turner and Lindsay Allen also are on the Sky. So if you are a fan of Notre Dame basketball, which some people on the show may be, but they don't know which WNBA team to root for, I suggest the Chicago Sky. They also have Angel Reese, of course, who is a rookie who's been playing really well, and Camila Cardoso, who's out right now with an injury, but she will be back in a couple weeks. So that team's only going to get better. But I encourage people to check out more than just the Fever games that are on national TV because the level of play has been really high. Last night, another Notre Dame player, Kayla McBride, on the Lynx, really close game, went into overtime against the Sun. Unfortunately, she hit one big shot to take the lead, but then couldn't get the second shot to win the game at the end. But they played really well. The Lynx are playing really well. So, I mean, there's just a lot of good storylines if you get past the first layer of like the thing that everyone knows, which is Caitlin Clark. But obviously you should watch the Fever games too, because right now they're 0-5. And I'm telling you, no one wants to be the first team to lose to the Fever. They all, no one wants that. And it's going to happen sooner rather than later. They're obviously going to win a game here. So right now we're on that watch. Who's going to be the first team to lose to the Fever?
welcome back. Hour number 2 here at GoJo and Golic. Thank you to Anish Shroff and Jessica Smetana for joining us in hour 1, getting us ready for some of the great action coming up in Philadelphia and Monaco this weekend. Plenty more coming up here in this hour that we're excited to get to. A lot of NFL headlines, big news out of the NCAA, obviously, with settlement in the House versus NCAA case that looks to, and this is not hyperbole, completely change the face of college athletics for a long time. Now, how much and who really benefits most from this, I think, is the interesting question to dig into, and we will. But there have been few things that have drawn the reaction recently that I did not expect, quite like Claudia Bellafato admitting that she hadn't seen Superbad on air. As we're talking about Officer Gillis from this whole Scottie Scheffler incident at Valhalla last weekend, this officer, for anyone that missed it, essentially on his record was reprimanded at one time by the Louisville Police Department for doing donuts in a parking lot with a drunk person that he had apprehended, basically straight out of the movie Superbad that Claudia hadn't seen. I mean, I've got Amin El Hassan from the Lebitard show and from Oddball texting me in disgust. The Twitterverse has exploded here, and I didn't expect this. Claudia, I have generally been forgiving of the things that you haven't seen or consumed because you're younger than us, and this movie came out in 2007 when you had to be in like your early teens, so I understand all that, but the rest of the world does not. So I'm sorry, bud, but you're the main character today.
People are saying it was their coming-of-age movie. Like, I clearly need to see this. I have started a list, and every day after our show, I go and add a movie to the list. I just don't have time, guys. I'm a busy gal, you know? But this weekend, I'm kidding. But it's a long weekend, and I will watch it this weekend. Have no fear. It is a long weekend, and I will be watching it Sunday night. So I will give you my full review next week.
Yes, you're gonna have a breakdown. We're gonna make luckily there's no like cliff notes of movies, so you're gonna have to watch this thing, and we will quiz you on it. But because
Mina Kimes has routinely cheated her way through this, Dad, using the Wikipedia entries for these movies. So don't put it past Claudia. You can be resourceful and YouTube clip and Wikipedia entry your way through this.
I am going to find a question I'll read the Wikipedia page on it, and then I'm going to ask a question that's not on it. So to make sure you watch it. This movie wasn't that long ago, right? I mean, it's not like before you were born.
I knew of it. I genuinely, you guys know, I've watched maybe a series of a show and I just don't watch movies. I've seen The Notebook 17,000 times, but other movies I know.
That's the one you've seen 17 times?
Senior, hold up. That is a great film.
Oh, it is. It is.
Okay.
But,
I saw Sparks, Notre Dame's very own.
I didn't know that. Favorite movie.
I enjoy it
all time.
But a movie like that one time is good for me.
Oh, no.
Give me the comedies that I watch over and over, like Superbad, like The Hangover. Hangover, please, you've seen that, right?
I've seen some of The Hangover.
Some of The Hangover. Oh, my God.
I don't watch movies. What do you want from me?
I like the idea of Claudia walking by these movies like it's like dip at a party or like a dish that's put out at the cocktail hour where she just grabs a little bit of it and then walks away.
Yeah, my thing is comedies, if it's like a historical movie or like a Boston movie, I've seen The Town, I'll watch that whole thing. That's fine. But if it's a funny movie, I just can't sit there for 2 hours. Like, I feel like I'm killing brain cells.
You hate joy? You hate to laugh?
No,
like you'd rather be Joe Mazzulla and watch The Town a million times?
I am Joe Mazzulla, okay? Yes.
Oh my
Claudia,
God.
Voice. That's not a comparison that we want publicly.
Wow.
Whatever, guys. I'm watching it this
contesting
weekend.
shots left and right. All right, so this weekend, Claudia's got homework that she is going to do in seeing Superbad so that the masses leave her alone here. Let's get to this NCAA topic, speaking of homework, though, because the whole dynamic around college sports seems like it's going to change here, Dad. And we've talked about this in one way, and the headline is going to be coming off this, that the NCAA now, in settling what should be a couple of court cases, a couple of antitrust lawsuits that had popped up against them, notably House versus the NCAA, that questioned basically the entire business model of this organization, now is reaching a settlement where the NCAA and its Power 5 conferences have agreed to allow schools to pay players directly for the first time in over 100 years of the organization existing right now. And Dad, the NCAA will pay more than $2.7 billion in damages over the last 10 years or so. So from about 2016 on, the athletes that were a part of the NCAA at that time will receive some amount of the settlement money coming back But then I think in most people's mind, the biggest case for this and the biggest headline coming off of this is now they have also agreed, according to ESPN sources, to a revenue sharing plan that would have schools sharing roughly $20 million per year of their sports related income with the athletes across all sports. So, Dad, who is this a win for coming out of this announcement from the NCAA yesterday?
Well, it'll start out as being a win for everybody because, remember, as part of the settlement, if the NCAA is basically saying, you can't sue us anymore. Stop suing us. Just stop it. So because of if this settlement, there will be no more lawsuits. So the NCAA wins there. And the players will feel like they've won. Mike, remember, the players have no representation here. So the players are going to look at this and say, oh, look at this. We get to split this money up. This is great. But how soon will it happen to where they say this isn't enough for what we're making schools and in college? We're not getting enough in return. We always talk about the revenue split in the pro sports being anywhere from 48 to 50% between player and league. So at some point, enough players are gonna say, wait a minute, we should be getting more. We're making them this much. We're getting this much. It should be more. So that's where it's, I think, going to go. So both are going to feel they've won early on, but then I think the players, but still, are you going to get representation? How is that? There are so many questions. We had Dominic Foxworth on yesterday trying to answer some of them, and I don't know the answer. I don't think anybody knows the answer to some of these of where it's going to go, of how, if players feel that way, how they can get a bigger slice of the pie, or if they can. But I'm going to tell you this right now, Mike, something you were not going to expect me to say. Do you know who the happiest person is about this, about the potential of this? Remember, this goes back to 2016. Think long and hard of who was an NCAA Division I athlete in 2016 and may get a little bit of money out of this. Yes. Yeah. Your sister, who loves money, loves spending my money, was a student athlete at Notre Dame in 2016. So all of a sudden, I bet she starts hitting Google, where's mine? What am I getting in this thing as a Division I swimmer at Notre Dame?
Yeah, excited for Sydney to completely forget to fill out the paperwork that would get her paid off of this. And unless somebody else does it, likely not recoup those funds. But fingers crossed for you, Sid. I hope you get your piece of the pie here, because 2012's class getting left out of the proceedings, because of course, why not? So yeah, Dad, and listen, it'll be great to see some of those athletes compensated. How they're going to divvy that up remains to be seen. Right. But you mentioned what's at the core of this. The revenue split for most professional sports is about 50-50 between the league and the players. In this one, it's 20%, and that's for all athletes. That's not for football. That's not for football and basketball. That's for everybody to split up. And it sounds like the schools are going to be in charge of making sure they're Title IX compliant in some way, and what that looks like for them. That part's still got to be worked out, because this is supposed to go into play not next fall, but the following fall of 2025. Right. And that summer is when this is all supposed to go into play. And Dad, this is, I think, the way it's structured, because you mentioned the real rub of this is, and this is what the NCAA, Dad, has done well for years, is they've ceded enough ground to not give up the full goose. And the full goose is admitting that these are employees and having to treat them as such. Because right now, somehow, some way, they're able to talk about a revenue share and paying players directly in a way that still seems like it's going to skirt true employment status. And so as long as they can do that, and now on the other side, get the congressional protection that they've been lobbying for years to basically say, you guys can't sue us anymore. On the other side of this, you're going to be done suing us. We're going to go back to being able to both punish and govern this sport in something resembling the way that we were used to there. Dad, power does kind of, and Mike Ryan from the Levitard Show was tweeting a lot about this yesterday. This does put power back in the hands of people that have had it for a long time in a way that's going to be eerily similar. And it's going to be a win for players. And Dad, it might be the only win that was on the table for these players. Because to your point, there's not a working actual union that they've got. There's so many players that you're trying to organize versus the other levels of sport where we talk about this happening, that part of me wonders what would have ever been realistic about them threatening to take this further, threatening a lockout later on if they do believe they're not getting as much of this. I think they're at a real disadvantage power-wise, because as we've seen, whether it's the member institutions or whether it's the NCAA themselves, there has been an organized and concerted effort to go and lobby for the things and points that they have wanted for years. It's been unsuccessful because nobody freaking likes them, and that's going to always be the thing that might be out there to help. But at the end of the day, this is kind of returning us to something more closely resembling the status quo than what we've existed in for the last couple of years, where it's been a free-for-all that's benefited the players because they can walk in and ask for however much money they want in a market that is completely uncapped for their earning.
So now, I mean, another win for the players, if you just want to look at it by numbers, they now have two revenue streams, right? One will be somewhat formulated and fixed by this payout, and the other is NIL. NIL is not affected by this because NIL is not part of the schools, but I will ask this, by the time this goes into effect, where will NIL be? Where will that change? Will it be in-house at that point?
Well, Dad, this is where we have to make the differentiation between the different kinds of NIL, because there's the NIL that we saw for athletes that had these massive marketing campaigns, Caitlin Clark having all these brands working with her in college, and those things that will still exist. But the NCAA now making very clear, hey, all of this is going to be a lot more by the books, and it's going to be none of the pay for play NIL, because that's the other cottage industry that popped up was the collectives. Like, this is the NCAA also seeking to destroy collectives. Like, the member institutions did not like having to deal with these outsiders that had come in and gained a ton of power in the way that they had in team building. And so that version of NIL, the one where a player could go to the collective and say, like Jaden Rashada in the case that's being litigated right now, hey, I want $13.5 million over 4 years, and if you can come up with that cash, I'll come and play at your school, and there is no cap to how much I can earn, and there's no cap to how much you can spend overall. That version of NIL would be a thing of the past. And so now these schools that have built up an outsized war chest because they got alumni that are willing to spend would all of a sudden be playing a much more reduced version of that same game and maybe losing some of that advantage that they had in an uncapped market.
Yeah, I mean, because what is the NCAA? The NCAA is the institutions, and the institutions are seeing all their boosters give money to the collectives. And you know where that money's not going to now? The schools, to use how they want to use it, is going to the collectives to buy a football player or to buy a basketball player. So I believe they would want to have more control over that and have the boosters now giving money back to the school instead of the collectives.
That's certainly a part of it, but I think all of it's just also more control. Like, they don't like having to go to these people and treat them as partners. They want to be able to make these decisions, especially coaches, on their own, and them having the ability to have control over the roster. Because, Dad, this is basically going to create a salary cap for every school of how they want to divvy up this money and how they want to use it there. It's going to be, from a fan standpoint and from what people have been looking for from a competitive standpoint, something more closely resembling an old system that I think fans and people at these institutions will like. But now, Claudia, we've very quickly gotten back to a world where, once again, the players don't have a voice. Like, the thing I am most concerned about in this is the players are also not going to have a voice in how they're, I guess right now, technically they do, because on the side of the plaintiffs in these court cases, they could string this out further along, but like, they're not going to get to negotiate their split of the revenue going forward all that much. And they're not going to have any say so in the further changes in the sport, like continued playoff expansion and the way that changes.
I just want to have you explain this further, too, because I know it can be complicated for people on the outside, not super familiar with it. We talked about the $2.7 billion in damages over the last 10 years, but now moving forward, so each school will get roughly $20 million per year. You mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this moving forward or back where it's going to be all players of every sport? Because I think the first thing that comes to mind is, well, that just means it's going to be the best football and basketball schools, and the lacrosses of the world and the hockey teams that aren't as good aren't going to see that money. Can you just break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, no, so the $2.7 billion settlement is going to be retroactive, and I believe for all athletes from all sports. Now, the formula they use to divvy that up, because just another example, like the video game settlement money, when that went out, like I got a paycheck off that was based on a formula of how many times you appeared in the game during your time in college, and they worked off that to figure out how much money each player would make. I don't know what formula they're going to use to pay the former athletes. To your point, Dad, before, I'm sure Sydney is not going to get the same payout as some of the marquee college football or basketball stars from those years that would have comparatively lost out on more revenue, because this is what it's about. For years, the NCAA was getting away with not giving players their fair share of all this TV money that's going forward. And again, you could argue that now that $20 million number that sounds big, might still be shortchanging the players in terms of their market cap in this sports economy that's popped up at this level. But now, Claudia, yes, going forward, that $20 to $22 million, and that's more of a percentage of the overall revenue. It could fluctuate as more money or less money comes in going forward. That's going to be divvied up amongst all athletes. And think about it like that. I was looking up last night, Dad, a school like Notre Dame, I believe, has somewhere around 900 student athletes on their campus. And I'll do away that student athlete word is a made up fairy tale NCAA word that they used to subvert this for a long time. There's about 900. Yeah, there's about 900 athletes on campus. And so now the challenge is going to be going forward because there are still scholarships involved. Like the other part of this is they're popping scholarship limits off. Think about like a baseball team. You usually would have like 12 and a half scholarships on some of the spring sport teams, some of those teams that you would divvy up. So it's a lot of partial scholarships. Sydney and the swim team dealt with this. Now it'd be, hey, you can give scholarships to everybody. You're not going to do that. You might change roster limits, but now you can do that. That still being a part of it means you still have to be Title IX compliant. And so how these schools go about figuring out how to balance the checkbooks, because we know, Dad, at the end of this, football and basketball players are still going to be given more money than almost everybody else in terms of trying to recruit these people and acquire talent for your roster.
Yeah, there's going to be a formula, Claudia, some formula that's going to be way above my head, that's for sure. And I'm sure it's going to be revenue based on what sports are bringing in what to what somebody's going to get paid. And we know who will get the higher amount, even though my daughter Sydney will believe she deserves the highest amount out there. Mike, you know what? I was working out with some of the former players at Exos out here, and we were chatting about the NIL and stuff. And some of these guys still know some fathers of kids who have sons in college. You know what one of the things is now is players that are transferring, that there's no room for a scholarship. And what happens is they become walk-ons, but have NIL money that pays for the schooling and the room and board and everything, like it's paying for their scholarship with the NIL, but they don't count as a scholarship toward the school now. So another one of these ways you find out how you can get a scholarship kind of worthy player by not having to use one of your 85 scholarships in football.
Yeah, it's been some of the creative finagling that's going on in a day and age right now where we've gotten to draw up the rules ourselves. And Dad, that's one of the other things that would go by the wayside. Again, if you don't have scholarship limits outside of maybe the roster limitations on your team, then that stuff becomes a thing of the past where a guy can come in and you can immediately say, hey, we've got the scholarship now. If they reduce rosters down to 85 overall, that's a different conversation altogether and one that we can have. But I guess, Dad, just to kind of put a bow on this in terms of if you're a fan, what do you care about coming off of this is for fans, you now, I think, get the order you crave. And if you were a school that felt like maybe you were getting left behind because your institution didn't have the same war chest as another, you might feel a little bit better about all of this because the reason we get fans who root for laundry sometimes rooting for the interest of management is because it does somewhat benefit them, I think, from a competitive standpoint. But there is part of me that from a player standpoint is happy they're getting something, understands that leverage is something that they had in a fleeting moment here with the courts on their side and might be able to have going forward. But this felt like the only real big swing we're going to see from them for quite some time. And they got some out of it, but it's still going to, I think, leave a lot of people wanting, considering the last few years, as chaotic as it had been an absolute gold mine for some players who were able to take this wide open market and grab a lot of cash that they deserved off it.
Yeah, like I said, a lot more people are going to see some bit of money now. And then at some point, like I said earlier, they're going to realize, you know what, we should be getting more. And then it'll be interesting where it goes from there. As far as fans, Mike, and alumni and all that, to me, remember when NIL first started, everybody's like, oh my God, the ruination of college football and college sports. Anything but. It's still been as popular as it's been, bringing in as much money or more than it has. Attendance is still there. TV viewership is still there. So this is not going to rock the foundation of college sports. It's still going to be highly watched and highly invested in. Maybe by venture capitalists.
I was going to say, it'll be ruined when private equity comes in and strips the sport of everything that we know and love about it in the name of ruthless market efficiency and creating profit for their investors. So I'm not dreading that at all. You're dreading that at all. Coming up next, though, we will lighten up your life a little bit with the most interesting fact about Dan Campbell that apparently none of us ever knew until yesterday on God's internet. That's coming up next year on GoJo and Golic. right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Before we get to the existential crisis happening over in TNT, I want to get to this from Dan Campbell, who has, over the last few years, I think become the ideal man. Like this big, burly, rough and tumble former NFL figure, also firmly in touch with his feelings, has given us all these incredible movie quotes of leadership that have translated into a Lions team that has now gone from laughingstock to true contender in the NFL. And Dan Campbell obviously was asked about that and about the mentality and the goals for this team, and gave us a textbook Dan Campbell quote yesterday that you can listen to here.
I don't see bust. I see Super Bowl. I don't know what the bust is. So
Super Bowl or nothing.
It's, here's what I know, man. We all know what every team ought to have that, right? Every team ought to be like, man, what are you playing for? You're playing for a Super Bowl. So we're no different than that.
Dan Campbell, when asked about if it's Super Bowl or bust for this team, said, I don't even know what bust is. He knows what grit is because it was on his hat, and now I want to buy that. But, Dad, the amazing thing about Dan Campbell that I wanted to share today, and yet another reason why we should love this man, I was tipped off by ESPN's NFL analyst Mina Kimes, that apparently Dan Campbell has 2 teacup Yorkies named Thelma and Louise. Dad, Dan Campbell is this fellow small dog guy like us out there now, just continuing to remind us that you can't put Dan in a box ever.
Let me tell you, teacup Yorkies, too, they're like accessories. They're so small. You just kind of carry those things around. I mean, this was more shocking because I remember being a little bit shocked when we started hearing and learning about Shohei Ohtani's small little dog as well, right? Big man with small dog. But having Dan Campbell, you could just see Dan Campbell up at the presser talking about biting kneecaps and then sitting at home going, oh, Thelma and Louise, come here, come to daddy. Yeah, he's a good baby. Let me pet your tummy.
Is this what you guys do? Because I feel like that was a little too.
What we do.
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
It's all we do. Hank, Harry, and Ted, oh my God, rub their bellies all the time. Absolutely. Yes, without question.
Yeah, no.
You're a dog lover, dog owner, that's what you do. So I'm sure that's what Dan does.
Yeah.
See, that's what I need to know now about Dan Campbell is what does his dog voice sound like? Because Claudia, and I don't know if you feel this way, I can't trust people who speak to their dog in their normal human voice. Mm-hmm. I believe that you've got to either have a separate voice that is mimicking what you think your dog would sound like, or you've got to address your dog in some sort of cutesy voice like that. And if you don't, immediate red flag for me. So I need to know, and I firmly believe, because Dan Campbell hasn't missed basically once in his coaching tenure so far, I have to believe that he is a guy with a dog voice.
Jail. If you talk to your dog like a person, immediate jail. I also feel that way about like person names for dogs, and Thelma and Louise, like I get it. I get the reference, but an actual name, like if you name your dog Dan, jail. Absolutely not.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute.
I mean, we have 3 dogs with human names over there that we just referenced.
Oh, let's hear them.
Oh, they are Hank, Harry, and Ted.
No, those are totally, they're not like proper, like, Daniel, come here. Like, that's weird. That's weird.
So if we call him Theodore, cute. We got to go to jail because that's his government name. That's his birth name was Theodore.
Theodore's cute. You call him Teddy. Yeah, no, you guys are good. You're good. No jail for you.
Hankleford. Call him Hankleford.
Miss Hankleford. All right. Well, while we all go, you know what? Love up your dog this morning. If you're listening to this and within earshot right now, make sure you love your dog. Give him some extra pats on the head from the GoJo and Golic game. We love them dearly. We love you dearly. We love Inside the NBA dearly. And the last couple days have been fascinating, Dad. We live in a day and age where now I think like the media are as much characters in the entire sports sphere as they've ever been. I've said it's the barstoolification of a lot of sports media, where you look at what Stephen A. Smith's become, certainly what Pat McAfee is in this space here, as people that are characters in the entire game, as well as the people that talk about it. And the Inside the NBA crew, as beloved a studio show as we've had in the history of professional sports, and something where I think if it truly does go in the way that people fear now as the rights for the NBA could go by the wayside, might be the last bit of like appointment studio show television that really exists as far as something that people speak out. And yesterday we had Charles Barkley join the Dan Patrick Show and talk about the future of this, and brought up one interesting lifeline that people had floated to him in terms of him having his own production company and taking matters into his own hands.
Well, I've talked to the guys about everybody signing with my production company, because I have my own production company, and I would love to do that if we lose it. but I have definitely had, actually somebody suggested that to me, to be honest with you, on the internet. So why don't Charles Barkley sign these 4 guys total, his production company and sell it? I'm like, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
But like I say, we're just sitting back waiting on these people to figure out what they're going to do. My 2 favorite wines are Inglenook and Opus. And these clowns I work for, they've turned us into Ripple and Boonesfarm and Thunderbird.
Dad, listen, we both worked at a big 4-letter network for a long time. Charles Barkley's been a staple at this. Are you surprised by just how guns a-blazing Charles has come out, torching his own bosses in the TNT brass in this situation?
No, because they're not going to be his bosses. They're not his bosses anymore. He had the wherewithal to have an out in his deal that if they lose the NBA, that he's a free agent. So no, and even if he was under contract for the next 10 years and they had the rights, he would still say what he's going to say. So this to me, listen, I don't have the money to spend, but obviously these networks are paying a lot of money. I know your mother tweeted out yesterday, make them the ESPN pregame show. Everybody, full thing. And I say, I don't care if it's ESPN or NBC. Now, Ernie has said basically that he wasn't leaving TNT, but who knows if he's playing chess, not checkers, and just kind of a negotiation ploy. Mike, you're right. It didn't matter to me what game was on TNT. I was turning on that show, and that is the only show I turn on in the sports world just to listen to what they're going to say, especially non-basketball. It is a great show. And if you're going to spend the amount of money you're spending for the rights, I don't know why you don't spend the millions more you would need to have this crew because of what they bring with it from advertising and the money they help bring in to bring this entire crew. Now, you could also say, how about the production staff as well? Because all the producers and everybody have to be all on in this as well. It's one hell of a team. But to think that I know you'd spend the money up front, but what you'd make in the long run, I think would make up for it. So to me, man, one of these networks, get lock, stock, and barrel. Get this show because it is the only show that people will just tune into no matter what the game is to watch. There is no other show in any other sport that you can say that about.
I think the only real comparison that I would say for years, and I don't know if it holds the same place or not now culturally, obviously it's still a show I think that just won at the sports Emmys, would be College Game Day, Dad, in the lead up to college football. Like that for me growing up was such the staple of, first of all, and obviously the characters on that show have changed a lot. You've still got Coach and Kirk Herbstreit in the middle of that, and Reese and a lot of the people that you've been familiar with, but so many of the faces from my childhood version of that, where you had Tom Rinaldi on that and some of the storytelling with him, and just it's changed enough in college football, so different that maybe that one doesn't hold quite the same place. It's still, I think, the premier sports show in the lead up to that sport, though.
It is, but I'll say the Fox show has gained ground. They have become a little more relevant. Listen, the ESPN show is still the show, College Game Day, but the Fox show has gained ground. Nothing's gained ground, at least that I believe, on the TNT show. I mean, that is so far and away above everything else and everyone else that that's why I just think it is but you did pick the show on College Game Day that would probably be the closest to it as far as appointment watching and viewing.
Well, because the other ones are true pregame shows, like even Big Noon Saturday, which is a good show, but it is a true pregame show. Like inside the NBA and College Game Day have been institutions. They have been things that you have set an alarm for on your own because of the entire own ecosystem that they've created around both of those things. I mean, the headgear stuff with Coach Corso has become college football canon that has had ripple effects on people and will till the end of time. But this is something that if we're grappling with the end, the one thing that has become very clear is for however long this lasts, you are going to get, even by his standards, a more unhinged version of Charles Barkley than we even thought was possible. And that is saying something truly spectacular. We'll take a look at Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals next here on GoJo and Golic.
back here on GoJo and Golic to talk Game 2 of the Western Conference Finals. We have the T-Wolves as 5.5-point favorites looking to even the series against the Mavs before heading to Dallas, which brings us to Cash It or Trash It, presented by DraftKings. Stay tuned to hear everything DraftKings has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Age and eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See DraftKings.com for details. Senior, are we cashing or trashing Timberwolves covering 5.5 tonight?
Man, I was so wrong last night with the Pacers, but yes, I'm going to cash that one. That they're going to get the win in Minnesota. Dallas already stole home court from them, but that it'll split it one each, and they'll cover the 5.5. So yeah, I'm going to cash this one. Mike, how about you?
I am too, and again, I feel like I'm riding this wave of, all right, Anthony Edwards, who didn't have by his game and his standards the kind of outing that we're used to, and said as much after the game, I need to do a better job of getting down, going towards the basket, relied too much on the outside shot. I think all of that is going to be remedied by a player that is, we talked about, burgeoning superstar, capable of incredible output, at times also capable of what we saw in that last game through this postseason run, where it dips a little bit below the standard. But with a player like that, especially a young player who's as aware of Claudia, his effect on the game as he is, I think counting on a big Anthony Edwards bounce back game that usually has a great trickle down effect for guys like Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert and that team, I think that combined with the home crowd there again that's been chomping at the bit for this, that's going to have them come out here and put their best foot forward.
Yeah, and like I said after that game, all the respect in the world to Dallas, but we also have to look at some stats that were outliers, because heading into this game, Minnesota was the top defense, the top team when it came to rebounding, and the best at attacking the rim, and they gave up 62 points in the paint, only got up 38. They allowed 48 total rebounds. So I would say those are some outliers compared to what we've seen for both of these squads. So I agree with you guys. I would lay the points here. I still think the T-Wolves can take this series, but it should be a good one. But it's hopefully cash lay in the 5.5.
Yeah. Yep. Hopefully cash there. I think the thing I'll be keeping my eye on the most at is how they decide to defend Kyrie Irving, because we saw again last night in the Eastern Conference Finals game, I thought the decided switch was how the Boston Celtics were going to defend Miles Turner. And immediately you saw them matching him up with Jaylen Brown, but you saw Jason Tatum, you saw smaller bodies on him that put Al Horford over on Pascal Siakam and said, all right, hey, Pascal, you might go off and get yours, but we're going to disrupt enough of the rest of the mechanics of this to give us better looks on offense, but certainly stymie them on defense. Kyrie Irving seemingly got to the basket whenever he wanted in game one of this series. And so if you're Minnesota, who is an incredible defensive outfit, I'm sure that all of the defensive strategy points were allocated into the, hey, let's make sure Kyrie Irving, who we've seen during this postseason run, right? Have games where he's a single-digit scorer, where he's relegated to being just a passer, and Luka Doncic has to shoulder that load, and you can go out and get wins in that fashion if you are an opposing team.
Well, that's the thing. You can let one guy go off and control the rest, right? But over the last 10 games, Kyrie has averaged just under 21 points and just under 6 assists a game. So he's been getting it done. But they could use one of those games, could Minnesota, in holding him into single digits. We'll see. It's, again, like one of those, you let the star go off and you control everybody else, or you try and control the star. So we'll see. I would be stunned if Dallas took both games in Minnesota, in all honesty.
There we go. Well, you know what? Book that now. Excited to hear about Dallas going up 2-0 when we get back and talk to you guys on Tuesday after the holiday weekend. Claudia, we've got more hoops action coming up tonight, though. Big one in the W, the top two picks squaring off and going at it is the Fever, as we talked about with Smetty before, looking to notch win number 1.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, although 5 games, 5 losses for the Fever, they are favorites here, -2.5. And that's the storyline, is those two up against each other. But I think the backline storyline here is the fact that the impact that these two have had on the game in general, the fact that we're talking about WNBA games, it seems like almost every other day. And I, for one, think Cameron Brink is great when it comes to just speaking on the game, and she feels so confident, very mature in her intelligence. And Senior, I definitely want to hear what you have to say, but I do want to get to this quick sound first. She went on Paul George's podcast to talk about all that.
You know, I'm not gonna lie, like, it's all been confusing, to be honest. It's like, why now? And I really do think like that has to do with the media. It's like where they water the grass, it grows. It's just such a crazy shift. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm like, what's I guess better late than never. Like, it's a great shift, but it's also like, I'm not gonna lie, like, I think our draft class is special, but there's so many draft classes before us that have been just as talented. So I think it's just like a change of the times. And I just hope like the vets know, and like I've been really vocal about this, but like I hope they know that it's so much respect from my end. Like Tina Charles like handed me my ass yesterday. Like, and I'm like, great. Like, Tina, thank you, because I learned a lot.
And Senior, I think back to when she was drafted number 2 overall, the speech she had giving respect to her class and everybody before her. I said, wow, she really knows how to talk and has legitimate respect for her class. She's impressive on the court too.
I think 2 things work for the women in this class and how we're hearing them relate to everything. Number 1, I think is pretty obvious. Women just mature quicker than men. I mean, that's I think that's a given. And number 2, especially if we talk from the basketball side of it, remember the guys come out, the stars one and done. So they're like 19 years old when they come into the league. These women are playing 3-4 years, sometimes 5 years in college before they even get to the pro level, to the WNBA. And they have a lot, and then especially this age group and social media and how they are out there in front of the media by Twitter, Instagram, whatever, TikTok, whatever it is, they're just exposed to a lot more of it. And then there's just kind of the natural personality as well. And boy, for Cameron Brink, she's hit them all, right? I mean, just a great personality, incredibly mature, the way she speaks about her class, but still giving love to the players that came before. And to be a star like that, I mean, I know she was obviously at Stanford in California, but to be in LA and to be, that's going out and throwing the first pitch and hanging out with Shohei, and being a star in LA, that's a town full of stars, is pretty impressive out of her.
And averaging just under 4 blocks a game through the course of the first 3 games doesn't hurt either. It's been weird. She mentioned the media coverage of it, Dad. We talked about it with Smetty a little bit before. Like Caitlin Clark, who's averaging like 17, 4, and 5 right now over the course of this, like has very much course corrected and is starting to have more of the season that we'd expect, even if the wins haven't flowed. The media coverage of it is something that's going to be interesting. I know a lot of people say, hey, when you hit the big time now, you're going to get people that do a lot of the generalist commentary that can skew towards the lowest common denominator. But with the comments from LeBron, with the comments from Charles about players in the W hating on Caitlin Clark, we really got to shove that to the side. There's no basis for it. And L. Duncan hit on it. It's this idea, and my least favorite attitude in sports, Dad, where people come in and try and tell athletes for whatever reason, oh, you need to be grateful for X, Y, or Z. They are. Most everyone who plays sports understands the job that they have is special and unique relative. It's still a job. And these people have still worked their entire asses off to get to the point that they're at right now, to be allowed to go out there and be competitors. And so this notion that anyone needs to genuflect or that anyone's actually been out of line, like we had some fun with it when Diana Taurasi was talking stuff during the March Madness tournament. We went with it a little bit there. It's tired already, and we're 5 games into the season right now. Everyone's going out here and bowling, enjoy and appreciate the hoop. We don't need to make up headlines about what's being said around the W about Caitlin Clark, because so far no one has been able to produce meaningful dialogue from any player in the W hating on Caitlin Clark in a way that's not just basketball players being basketball players.
Well, that's what I mean. This, when we talk about it, I think it does go too far, because it should be, and it is in all sports, is listen, if somebody comes in with a lot of fanfare and you're already a pro vet, what do you want to do? You want to knock them down. What do you think the Titans want to do to Caleb Williams when he comes in that first game, right? First regular season game. They want to destroy him, not because of what he did in college or what Caitlin did to become the all-time scorer and saying, oh, I hate you for that, or you've done this or you've done that. It's because, okay, now you're coming into the pro level. Different game up here, and we're going to show you it's a different game. So from the competitive side of it, I get it. That's true everywhere. But yeah, it has gotten out of hand in some places. Completely agree.
It has. Let the basketball take over. There's been a lot of good hoops played around the W. Take some time and enjoy it and appreciate what you get to see. Coming up next, let's talk about naughty game show moments here. Somewhere Steve Harvey's shaking his head next. right, guys, time to finish off the show in the week, holiday weekend edition, with this, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you off into that weekend and feeling good. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out here live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network, our YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, Xumo Play, as well as at DraftKingsNetwork.com. And if you miss any of that or our great guests, you can check us out from noon to 1 p.m. Eastern, wherever you hear VSiN on the radio. And, of course, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you to Jessica Smetana from the Dan Le Batard Show, Anish Shroff, ESPN and Carolina Panthers play-by-play announcer, for both stopping by. Check them out wherever you get your podcast or right here on YouTube as soon as we get done. Guys, let's get to this, that, and the third. I love game shows. We all love game shows. And one of my favorite pastime on game shows, especially Family Feud, is when someone says some sexually explicit answer that makes Steve Harvey shake his head in utter disgust. It wasn't Family Feud, but Wheel of Fortune decided to get in on the action last night with a moment that will end up going down in game show lore forever. Here was one contestant's attempted guess to solve the puzzle that left everyone speechless.
Category is phrase, and off we go. Tavares, right in the butt.
What? Come on, man.
No.
What?
It's 4 letters.
Blake.
This is the best.
Yeah, that's it, I think. Yeah. Much better answer.
Yo, I don't know how anyone's making direct eye contact with my guy Tavares after that one. Dad, it's 4 letters in that first word. I understand it's a pressure-packed situation, but that man gave us a window into his soul, and we're all a little bit weirded out by what we saw.
How you going on from that? How you going on? I mean, what? How do you come back from that? How do you finish the show? How do you not cringe every time that dude hits the buzzer on what he might say? And plus, it's only 4 letters, dude. Okay, right is 5 letters. All right. I mean, wow. Didn't see that coming. Not gonna lie.
I didn't see it coming either. He also just sounded way too confident. Like, oh yeah.
Yes.
Right in the butt.
Yeah. Right in the butt.
That's what it is. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Man,
No.
I mean,
how was
Pat
that not
Sajak,
right,
man? That's one of those moments where, that's one of those moments where if you're a game show host, that's truly where you earn your keep, because how you handle those moments. And again, I feel like you get a lot fewer of those on Wheel than you do some of these other shows, because overall, it's not a game that's got it. Like a Family Feud, they set you up with some categories that definitely border on sexually explicit from the jump, and you're dealing with the answers from the American public. This stuff on Wheel has always tended to be a little bit more of the family game. So, listen, I'm not here to kink shame anybody here, and what consenting adults do in the privacy of their own home is fine. Yeah. But my guy Tavares right there has now cemented himself as a game show legend. They got to get him on the rest of the circuit. Quite honestly, Dad, we need the crossover event now. I need his family on Feud so that we can introduce this moment to Steve.
Also, can I just say, just so y'all know, when movies like Superbad and Hangover came out, I, as a child, bought Family Feud on my computer because I loved that game so much. So I was sitting, and I was a little nerd. But yeah, so I gotta say, Steve Harvey, he's just so entertaining too. Like, I would love to see this man's family on there, because I can't imagine the wild things.
Steve Harvey is phenomenal. And Mike, you're right. Get that man's family on there, because the question's set up for things like that. But there is no doubt in the history of game shows, and I love game shows, Steve Harvey's reaction to contestants is second to none. It's fantastic.
Naked Grandma lives in my brain rent-free. Claudia, let's get to that here. One man seizing an opportunity coming off of a massive setback.
Yeah, there was a tornado in Iowa, and a recent high school graduate was asked about, the aftermath, and all he could talk about was this.
I lost a lot, including my golf clubs. I had like $3,000 into that. I'd like to shout out TaylorMade and Titleist and Callaway. I really need new sets, or a new set. I lost it, and I just love golf.
Less than 12 hours later, though, Callaway entered the call, and they're going to help him out, so...
Yeah, I mean, like, Dad, at that point in time when you've got the wherewithal to do this, I don't know why he didn't go straight for PXG and just say, let's take the Cadillac out. This man, if you're not watching on DraftKings Network is standing behind what I'd imagine is the wreckage of his home right behind him, or some home there. So the backdrop is utter chaos behind him. And with a smile on his face in the most deeply Tornado Alley response possible for someone who clearly has seen some of this in his life, use this moment to go out here and get himself free golf clubs. I cannot help but applaud this man.
I'm going to say, why didn't he go for more? We know tornadoes can lift cars up. Why not? My Ferrari is gone. I can't believe that's gone. It was lifted and gone. I can't find it anywhere. Boy, oh boy, I love that car. Ferrari, whatever brand you want. Go for more than golf clubs, man. If you're going to go for it big.
The golfer.
That is true.
He doesn't care. He just wants his clubs back, man.
I do appreciate that. I do appreciate that. You know what, Claudia, to that point, there is a purity about this that, like, if you start to ask for a little bit more, now it seems calculated. In a day and age where everything on the internet feels like a work, my antennas are even up for this. Like, obviously, part of this makes me feel like, am I being had right now? But the golf clubs make it slightly more believable. And for all these brands, they're just waiting for some opportunity for nice, easy pub like this. A set of clubs to them doesn't mean anything to go down here and give it to a guy that might have potentially lost his house in all this. So, yeah, I think I'm kind of with you, Claudia, there. It might have hit the sweet spot right here in this moment. So congratulations to the young man on getting the clubs renewed there. Hopefully he doesn't have the opportunity to ask for any more, because that would mean there was another tornado going through. And obviously we want everyone to stay safe and not have to deal with these catastrophic events here. Claudia, let's get to the third here and talk about animals in toilets.
I hate this so much. I saw this picture and I quivered. Miami Dolphins linebacker Jaylen Phillips posted this picture, or video rather, of an iguana in his toilet. And he said, this is so Florida. How did it get there, guys? No, absolutely not. I'd move out.
Listen, as someone who had a possum wind up under his bathroom sink within the last calendar year and had to deal with the fallout of that, which already robbed me of some of my innocence. The bathroom door stays closed at night now, just in case my furry friend that we dubbed Wally decides to come back home from, I believe, the last time he was seen, the field in Lubbock, Texas. Dad, my worst fear, as someone who views toilet time like Eric Cartman as the last bastion of American freedom, is having the sanctity of the toilet compromised by some sort of reptile, because now you can never sit in peace again.
So a lot of it is where you live, right? So I spent half the year out here in Arizona. When it gets really hot out here, there's some do's and don'ts. And when you're golfing out here and it's hot, don't ever go into, when you hit the ball off the fairway into the desert, don't ever go in there without a club. Because there are things in there. I just the last few days saw some snakes in there. I was playing the other day and a coyote walked right past us on the fairway. So you know what's out here. Every morning when I get up to do the show, because it's early and still dark out, I be careful opening the front door, because one time I opened it, there was a snake right there. So you got to be careful in certain areas of where you live. In Florida, because anytime I've seen things in toilets, 9 times out of the 10, it's Florida. So that is the place, before you sit down, you always have, normally you don't even think about it. You go sit on the toilet. If you live in Florida, you damn well better check that toilet every single time before you sit down and get yourself a little bit of a surprise. That's friggin' terrifying. Terrifying that's in the toilet, because we've seen snakes in the toilet as well. I don't even want to let my mind go where it's going to go, okay? But man, that freaks me out.
It's
the first story.
Yeah, first story. It's exactly right.
I was going to say, the answer is right in the first.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank.
Up
right
the
in the butt. Dear God, help all of us here. And we haven't even gotten to the final boss of all of this. Imagine the horrors that come out of a place like Australia, where it was an entire island nation that used to be a prison island, where everything seems designed to kill you. That seems like the final boss of toilet terror, and something I hope most of us never have to experience. We hope you don't have any sort of toilet-related issues going over the holiday weekend. Enjoy Memorial Day weekend. Have a great time with your loved ones. We'll talk to you guys Monday. Good luck and go Irish. Here we go, boys.
Ha ha!